Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us. I'm Mayor Tatiana Ballantyne, and it's certainly wonderful being here with you today to share our new commercial leasing handbook. It's certainly a powerful tool to help our small businesses stay rooted in our city. Sometimes people wonder what happens after a task force wraps up its meetings. Where does the work go? And at the forefront of this work is making sure that small businesses can stay in Somerville. Well, this is where the work goes. It goes towards developing useful and efficient tools like this handbook. It's a real tangible result of thoughtful collaboration process created with and for our small business community. It's the product of our small business anti-displacement task force, which included 20 small business owners who gave their time and their truth to shape this resource. Their insight, their real stories are reflected on every page. And the results certainly is something that can help every small business owner here in Somerville understand their rights, protect themselves with a lease, and advocate for the long-term stability their businesses deserve. Whether you're just starting out or looking to grow, this guide helps make sense of the confusing terms and tough negotiations. And it does it in multiple languages to reflect and support the diverse businesses in our community. I want to certainly thank our economic development team and the Metropolitan Area Planning Council for your incredible work on this project, and to all the community members and experts who contributed. This would not exist without you. Somerville small businesses are at the heart of our neighborhoods. They make our squares vibrant, our city more equitable, and our economy more resilient. Our job is to make sure you have the tools to thrive, and tonight we're proud to add one more tool to the toolbox. Thank you again for being here, and thank you for everything you do to make Somerville such a dynamic and creative place to do business. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Ballantyne. That was great. I just want to say the reason why we embarked on this journey was that we really found that there were not many protections for small businesses in Massachusetts. And a lot of those protections are really tied into your lease. And so, as we were talking from the results of the anti-displacement task force, particularly the small business one, but also very relevant to the arts and creative one as well, a lot of your rights are just tied into this lease. So that's really what got us to work on this project, to work with MAPC. I'm going to make sure that there is a link in the chat for everyone to be able to access the leasing handbook and see that we have it in multiple languages, Spanish, Portuguese, and Haitian Creole as well. And that being said, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Camille to talk a little bit more about it. Camille is a senior economic development planner at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kelly. I'm so glad to be here today with all of you, and really excited to have worked with the City of Somerville on this commercial leasing handbook. So I'm going to walk through some of the content of the handbook, and it's not going to be everything. There is a lot to commercial leasing, as I'm sure you all here know, but we're really glad to talk about it today. So how did we create the lease handbook? Just to kind of give an overview of our process, we started by reviewing existing small business leases in retail and restaurant and service industries, just to see, what kinds of leases are existing businesses working with right now? What's the type of language that they're working with right now? Then we talked to a lot of businesses across the city in different business districts and in 3 different languages, really to understand, what is their experience with commercial leasing scenarios? What kinds of questions do they have? What kinds of advice would they give to others? And this was really a great opportunity to hear on the ground, what's it like being a small business and negotiating a lease? So, we spoke with those small businesses, and then as Kelly and the mayor mentioned, we worked with the Small Business Anti-Displacement Task Force members. So huge appreciation to them as well. We then spoke with a number of commercial leasing experts. So that's legal experts, brokers, city departments, nonprofit, business support professionals, and again, those small business task force members. We then, compiled the lease handbook and were able to translate it into these other languages, just recognizing that we really want this to be useful. And these are the most commonly spoken languages by business owners in Somerville. So I'll also just give some appreciation to those who are funding this work. That was the state program, the Community Compact Cabinet Best Practices Program, as well as the MAPC Technical Assistance Program. So just before I start getting into the content of this, I just want to mention that, today's presentation in the lease handbook is just a general overview of commercial leasing. It's not guaranteed to be up to date. The handbook and today's presentation are for general information only and not intended to provide legal advice. Readers and attendees are encouraged to seek legal advice from a licensed Massachusetts attorney who's experienced in commercial lease negotiations and tenant disputes when negotiating a commercial lease. And finally, Somerville staff and MAPC cannot conduct lease negotiations, nor can they provide an opinion on a lease term. So with that, I am really happy to get into what does this lease handbook say? And it has a number of sections, and it starts with steps to take before signing a lease. There are a lot of things to do before signing a lease that are really important, and this is just a top line overview here. So one, you really want to set up your business with a number of things, such as creating a really strong business plan and knowing your finances. Business ownership is hard, it's complicated, and it's a really wonderful opportunity for people. So having a strong business plan is really going to set you up for success. You can work with the business support organization to help you do that. There are a lot of experts who are here to help you, and they can do so in your language. And you can reach out to local banks as well to really learn about financing. Before signing a lease, you want to make sure to think about permitting and licensing. The city of Somerville, and actually folks on this call today, are here to help you do that. Permitting and licensing can take some time, so we want to make sure that you think about that before signing a lease. And so you're not waiting for that as you really need to start generating revenue with your business. And you also want to make sure before signing a lease that you find the right space. Even if you think you see your dream corner store opening, you want to make sure that it is right for you. So one, you want to make sure the business is allowed to operate there. Maybe the city's zoning or maybe something about the landlord's preferences mean that you can't actually locate there. You want to visit that space in person, make sure that if the space is updated, make sure if you want to do any renovations in the space that what kinds of requirements that will include. So you really want to talk to the city of Somerville, honestly, about if you find a space, is it going to be right for your business? And there are a lot of other things that are really, really good to do before signing a lease. So make sure to check out the City of Somerville's website to learn about that. So lease negotiation basics. What is a lease? A lease simply is a legal agreement between your business and a landlord. So negotiating a lease means talking through the details of it with your landlord before you sign the agreement, so that you and your landlord are clear on the rights and responsibilities of you as the tenant and the landlord throughout the whole lease cycle. As folks mentioned before me, as Kelly mentioned, commercial tenant rights in Massachusetts are limited to what's written in a lease. So it's really important to have one. That is your protection, is in your lease. And finally, just how do you get started? Commercial leasing can be really intimidating. It can be challenging, and that's why we wanted to create this resource in recognition of that. But you want to remember that your business is an asset for the landlord, one, and for the neighborhood as well. And we want this handbook to empower you to really recognize that business ownership is wonderful and it is celebrated in Somerville. And we want to make sure you know that you can sign a lease for a space and situation that is right for you. You don't want to sign something that's not going to be right for you. Getting into the key elements to negotiate. So again, this is just a really simplified list of the many things to negotiate as part of your leasing process. And I'll talk through them pretty quickly, but you definitely want to negotiate your lease length and renewal options. So how long is your original lease going to be? And then do you have an option to say when the lease is over, add another 3 years or another 5 years if everything's working out really well? You want to negotiate the uses of the property, so make sure it's very clear what you want to do there and that that's okay with the landlord and with the zoning in that area. You want to negotiate the payment amount, of course. So how much is rent and anything else that you are required to pay on a regular basis? How much does that increase each year? And what's the payment process? Are you writing a check? Who are you delivering that to? Is it direct deposit? Making sure that you're not paying in cash. It's important not to pay in cash for leases. And you want to negotiate potential additional payments. So there are all kinds of things that businesses do have to pay for. Utilities, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes property taxes, insurance, your trash, your pest control, your security deposit. There are all kinds of things, and you want to carefully think through each of them. And we list a lot of them in the handbook itself. So really make sure you go through and recognize all of the expenses that are going to be there throughout your lease term. You want to negotiate space improvements or alterations. So for instance, if you walk in there for a tour before signing a lease and see that something's really wrong with the roof, you want to be negotiating who's going to fix that, who's going to pay for that, how does that all work together? You want to negotiate access, so the landlord, when they're allowed to come in the business, and communication styles with the landlord. You want to negotiate your lease renewal and termination, basically thinking about what'll happen when the lease is up. How long do I have to, before the lease ends? When do I have to tell my landlord? When does the landlord have to tell me that it's ending? That kind of thing. And then you want to negotiate what happens if there is ownership change of the business. This is, we see this happening quite a bit in the region, is that ownership changes, whether someone sells the business property to a family member or another company, that kind of thing. So you want to be just really prepared for what happens in all these scenarios. So the handbook is trying to be, really nicely user-friendly for you. And as I said earlier, we spoke with a lot of existing businesses in Somerville about their experiences. And so there are a few different ways that those experiences appear in the handbook. One, the business owners offered tips. They offered tips to tell other business owners or people who have to negotiate leases, what should they know? What's really important? So for example, a business owner recommends that before you sign a lease, you talk to the city's permitting liaison about what you'll need in your application and the timeline of that. And this will help you know how much time will pass before you can open your business to customers. So lots of little tips throughout the handbook will be helpful. And then each section also includes example questions for the landlord, really recognizing that you can ask your landlord any kind of question and you can negotiate any section. So for instance, you can ask them, how is the water bill divided? If there are multiple tenants in a property, how much am I paying for and how is that split up? To make sure that it is right for your business. You can ask if there are common area expenses. You can ask how much are property taxes and talk about that. So kind of an overview of key insights of the lease handbook. One, it's really important to have a lease. We can't stress that enough. Two, make sure you read your lease carefully before signing it. Sometimes problems happen when folks don't fully read or don't fully understand the lease. Three, ask for a review from a lawyer or a trusted partner before signing the lease in case they notice something that you didn't realize and that could really impact your business over time. 4, make sure to have insurance for your space and your possessions. 5, once you sign a lease, again, that's you've locked in your rights and limitations. I just also mentioned the lease handbook has a whole long list of terms and definitions that really explain some of the complicated legalese that is involved in commercial leasing. So you can check those out. To get into some of the legal resources. So there are ways that you can, as a business owner, work with an attorney for, sometimes it is expensive and it doesn't always have to be. So for instance, Lawyers for Civil Rights is an incredible organization in the greater Boston region. And they, through this a kind of sub-organization called BizGrow, they provide free legal assistance to minority, immigrant, and women small business owners. So this is a fantastic resource that we really recommend. And Lawyers for Civil Rights has regularly occurring legal clinics with real estate attorneys, and really encourage folks to go there and just ask any questions, again, for free. Lawyers for Civil Rights actually just on Monday released a model lease for small businesses that basically you can plug in your business's name and talk through with your landlord all kinds of things to negotiate with this model lease. That's a great tool. Next, another free or very low cost resource is the local law school clinics. So you're about to hear a little bit more about one of them, but I'll just shout out Harvard Law School's transactional law clinics, the Community Enterprise Center at Boston College, and Community Business Clinic of Northeastern University, all just really wonderful spaces where small business owners can get help. They do require a little bit more lead time. So if you need to sign a lease tomorrow, it might not be quite the right resource, but they are really wonderful and you're about to hear more about them. And then finally, there are opportunities for paid legal support. So one, if you know a business in your area, or just a business you know about who has worked with a lawyer that they like, definitely get those referrals. That can be really helpful. You can also check out these different associations for referrals. So like the Boston Bar Association, the Massachusetts Bar Association, or some resources on the Massachusetts State website. So with that, enough of me. You get to hear from, I'm very excited to introduce Professor Darryl Walton. He directs Northeastern University's Community Business Clinic. So in addition to teaching and supervising clinical students, Professor Walton engages in research on business legal issues involving governance and leadership and decision-making in novel and complex industries. Prior to joining the Northeastern Law faculty in 2022, Professor Walton was a visiting clinical professor in Boston University's School of Law's Startup Law Clinic, supervising BU's law students as they represent MIT and BU students in forming strong legal foundations for early stage business ventures and protecting intellectual property. So also, aside from additional experience at law schools across the country, Professor Walton has twice been a business owner himself, so he's very familiar with this whole process. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Darryl.
Awesome. Thanks, Camille. Excited to be here and a part of this wonderful initiative. So as Camille said, my name is Darryl Walton. I am an attorney here in Massachusetts, but I also work at Northeastern University School of Law in their clinical program. And I'll talk more about what the clinical program is and how you can approach clinical programs either at Northeastern or other law schools in the area. But first, I want to talk about things to consider when things go wrong with your lease, right? So how do you manage problems after you sign, right? So Camille talked about this kind of locking in once you have your lease. And what I'll say is the first step to actually managing problems with your lease after you sign is to actually get in front of this by doing three things. One, it's setting the right expectations before you sign the lease. Two, managing your relationships. And then three, documentation of all of your legal matters or all of your business matters in relationship to the lease and to your landlord. And so starting with the first one, expectations. So because the contract or lease is so important to this arrangement between you as a tenant and your landlord, it's really important that you read your lease, right? You understand the terms in your lease, you negotiate, you ask questions. These are the things that will actually help ensure that you know what's in the lease and what's not in the lease. Because of how leases are written, you know, if you're not sure of what's in the lease, you could be operating under wrong terms. For instance, right, leases don't usually happen in an instant, right? There's a bunch of conversation that comes forwards and backwards between the tenant and the landlord. Because of that, right, there's sometimes things that seem like promises that are made. But if those things are not in the lease itself, there's legal mechanisms called like a merger clause or complete contract clause that would preclude you even raising that you had this oral agreement because it's not inside the actual written lease. And so you really want to take the time to, engage with your lease, understand it. As Camille said, seek out counsel from either a lawyer or someone who is experienced in engaging with commercial leases, and then ask questions. Right, the lease is not a, take it or leave it, right? It is a conversation between you and the landlord, right? You may not always come to an agreement that leads to signing the lease, but you want to be your own best advocate, in this regard. As part of this, in setting the right expectations, you also have to know what you don't want, right? There's a term in law and in business called BATNA, which means the best alternative to negotiated agreement, right? This is simply, if I don't sign this, so what is the best option? What is the option if I don't sign this, right? What is available to me? Because you want to know what your other possible options are so that you don't end up signing a bad agreement. So if I know that you can get a certain deal over, 3 streets over, right? You're not going to accept a worse deal, with this lease. And so knowing your alternatives will only help empower you and help ensure that you are, able to, advocate for yourself. Second, relationships. Relationships are important, right? And I know you're like, I'm a lawyer, I should be talking about what's on the paper, right? But really, a lot of what law is the interactions between people as they are engaging in situations that happen to relate to the law. And so when you're engaging with your landlord, right, both before you sign, right, and then after you sign, you want to make sure you have a good relationship with them, right? You don't want to sign a lease with a landlord that, from the start seems like there's this immense tension, right? You want to make sure that you're engaging with someone who feels that they want to do business with you, that they want to engage with you. Because by managing these relationships, you end up being able to get out in front of a lot of issues, right? If you have these relationships, you're able to communicate. And if we're communicating about problems, open line of communication really allows for, us to see things before people get disgruntled. As a lawyer, right, the disgruntled nature is what leads to lawsuits. And so if you can get out in front of that, that is something that you really want to do. And so having regular communication with a landlord, sizing up your landlord to make sure that they are engaged, that they value your business in the space is another thing that is helpful. And then third, documentation, right? So I talked about a whole bunch of things that are proactive, but you can't always do everything before, right? Sometimes issues do arise, right? Whether that's complaints that you have against your landlord not fulfilling terms of the agreement, or your landlord having complaints against you. And one of the best things that you can do is document everything, right? Document all your communications with the landlord, document all your transactions like payments, right? Documentation is something that courts love because courts want to see what happened in the moment. And so if you have a contemporaneous or present, essentially memory or record, right? Courts will rely on that. And they rely on that far more than if you're in court and you have to say, well, this is what was said, or this is what was given, or this is what I did. And so if you have that record with you at that point, from that point, it really is helpful. And so things to think about there is keeping clear written records. And so written is important, and written doesn't mean that it has to be like a typed up fancy, like, minute by minute account. Written could be a notepad, written could be an email, right? But you want to make sure that it's in some kind of tangible format rather than it's an oral history. And so by writing these things down is very helpful, right? Inside the guide, you'll see a tip, and one of them relates to payment, right? It says, you don't want to pay by cash because cash doesn't have this written record or documentation, right? Sometimes you feel that you might have to pay by cash. Write out a receipt, right? A receipt is a record. I'm not advising you, to pay in cash, but sometimes, you have to do the imperfect thing. And the way that you protect yourself when doing the imperfect thing is by writing a record. And so having a receipt, right? Having receipts that are signed or documentation that's signed by both parties that acknowledges these things, right? These are all tips that are practical in nature, but help set you up for engaging with resolving problems after they occur, right? And so the guide has walked through a number of scenarios. I will leave those for you to explore, but you'll see that most of those scenarios, focus on one of the three things, right? Do you know your rights, right? And so what's in the contract, right? Do you have a good relationship? Because sometimes it's the lack of a relationship that leads to issues. And do you have good documentation, right? And so what records have you been keeping, right? And in keeping records, one last thing is like, sometimes the record is, I had an oral conversation and then I wrote down a comment. I wrote down what happened during that conversation afterwards. And so just keeping that in mind as well. And so again, right, you're going to run into issues in this. Know that the first step rarely in any engagement is to bring in a lawyer or to go to court, right? These are costly endeavors. You as a business owner want to focus on your business. The landlord as a business owner wants to focus on their business. And so finding mutual resolution that continues the relationship is going to be key. But that being said, if you feel that you need to get outside counsel, don't wait. The sooner that you engage legal counsel, the better. Don't let a situation deteriorate where, there is no open line of communication. But do know that, most attorneys do have a cost associated with them. And, that is an adverse, that is a negative in addition to whatever else may come from that. And so I just talked about cost. There's a number of amazing resources in the Boston area, as Camille mentioned, and 4 of them are clinics in the Boston area. So Harvard has a clinic, Boston College has a clinic, Northeastern has a clinic, Suffolk also has a clinic that are outward facing to the community. And our clinics are experiential education opportunities where law students in their second and third years of law school are able to actually practice and work with real clients and help engage them on real legal issues under the supervision of practicing attorneys like myself. And so each semester, each clinic takes on a range of matters or clients, and we help walk them through whatever they're going through. And so in the case of a commercial lease, this could be early stage negotiation of a lease, or it could be helping you understand your rights, as problems start to resolve. I will say that most of the clinics in this space do not engage in litigation. And so if you have a litigation matter, there are other resources available, but most of the time the clinics are more transactional and proactive. And so keeping that in mind, but they are a great resource. Again, as Camille said, we tend to look out in advance of the semester. And so if you can think ahead about where you are in your journey, about when you will either need an initial lease or need to renew, the earlier that you can get out in front of it and give us more lead time, the more help that we can provide. Again, our services are generally pro bono for anything that isn't like a third-party fee. And so it's a very helpful resource. And so with that, I will turn it back over to Camille.
Yes, awesome. Thank you so much, Darryl, for providing that additional context. It's great to hear from you and about the clinics. And I'm actually going to turn it over to Adriana Fernandes. She is a senior planner and minority and women-owned business support provider in the City of Somerville Economic Development Division. She has over 25 years of bilingual community engagement experience. She is really wonderful. She's one of the folks who you'll talk to if you're a business owner in Somerville. So I'm going to share my screen for you, Adriana, and take it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all the partners who collaborated with us to make sure this commercial tenant guidebook could be released today. So co-workers, business owners, workers, both Main Streets, East Somerville Main Streets and Union Square Main Street staff, MAPC staff. So it's really a teamwork. And I can't wait to start distributing the guide within the business community. I know that it was like we had a chance to block walk and listen directly from the business owners about their needs. So now it's time to give them back. And so I appreciate that today we've been here together to celebrate that. Finally, we got the guidebooks and in different languages, which is very important, especially like in a city like Somerville. So I would like to add that our team holds office hours weekly on Thursdays from 4 to 5. The link is on our website. So if the business owners or workers, they have any questions about like permitting, licensing, zoning, how to open a business, they can just pop up and talk directly with city staff from ISD, city clerk, economic development. So also, if somebody is interested in like finding available properties through Somerville, we also have a list through the site finder that we can provide. We also can provide language support through Somerville Office of Migrant Affairs. Our department also can support with English, Portuguese, and Spanish. But we have like too many other languages in a hotline that can help, language line. And Somerville Economic Development also have a newsletter. So in case the businesses owners, they would like to get to know more about grants and opportunities, we encourage like everybody to sign up for the newsletter. So we have additional small business support through our partners. I already mentioned like East Somerville Main Streets, Union Square Main Street, Somerville Chamber of Commerce, and more. So we also, I think we already mentioned the commercial leases 101 guide from the transactional law clinics of Harvard Law School. And the guides, they're like, we have a link that we can find the guides in different languages, but we have the hard copy. So if anybody is interested, we can come over and just give you like in person or mail. But just so you know that the city of Somerville, we offer all those supports. And as Camille said, before signing a lease, the business owners can come and talk to us about the licensing permit. So we're here to support all the business. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Adriana. So with that, we're going to go ahead and open it up for Q&A. If anyone has any questions for us, any questions on the process, any questions on how the handbook was created or anything like that that's coming to mind, feel free to either put it in the chat or come off mute and ask any of your questions. Dana, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Kelly. I wanted to reiterate the appreciation to all of you who've been involved in the creation of this really important project. I'm going to apologize for the background noise. I'm in the office and there's meetings happening behind me, so my apologies for that. But again, fantastic job on pulling this really beneficial and useful resource together. It's going to be very useful and beneficial to the small business community. I think we're going to feel the impact of it, for years to come. So I wanted to first say thank you for that. My question for anyone in the group is, I'd be curious to know how you found the process of pulling together this resource in terms of getting, either anecdotal or experiential information from the various business owners that informed how you pulled it all together. I've gotten a chance to see the document itself. It's incredibly robust in terms of the information it provides. But what did you learn from the stories that you heard from the various stakeholders?
Well, just from interviewing several business owners for this study as we embarked on it, I was greatly surprised at how challenging running a business can be, and how the experienced entrepreneurs that we met with, how much they had to learn on their own, from trial and error, and from kind of responding to situations as they occurred, and had to adjust on the fly. And I think that this guide can really provide some of that real world knowledge to our community's entrepreneurs, so that they don't quite have to recreate the wheel and learn strictly from experience, but can learn from other long-term entrepreneurs and avoid some of the pitfalls that they might have to face with some assistance, not have to do it alone.
Yeah, thanks, Ted. And to add upon that, I think it was just interesting to see kind of the wide variety of experiences that a commercial tenant can have, right? We heard everything from I don't have a lease to, my lease now, the building was just bought by someone, and so now my lease is at risk, and what am I supposed to do in this sort of situation? It was just, the vast range of experiences. And I do want to kind of reiterate what Darryl had said about relationships, right? It seemed like every person you speak to has an opinion about their landlord, right? Whether it's positive or negative. I think that that's like a very key part to your experience as a commercial tenant. Even though the lease is that legal document that's, securing your rights in some sort of tangible way, there is this whole nother world that is communicating with your landlord and communicating with even your business partners or the people that might share the space with you as well. It's just everyone has very vastly different experiences. And obviously, this tenant leasing handbook isn't going to be a one size fit all solution, but I think it is something that if we can get this in the hands of someone before they're signing a lease, it just makes you feel a lot more comfortable knowing that they have the tools, they have some resources, so that I think we have like 3 or 4 pages of terms and definitions, right? That is really dense material. It's really hard to understand. So just like the vast difference of experiences, but also just feeling like we have something that we can give to business owners as they're walking in the door saying, I'm not sure where to go. Well, here's a good starting off point. And I think that makes me really happy to know that we can provide that for small business owners and hopefully, again, get them into good leases and into good relationships with their landlord.
Yeah, and I would only add to that, our process was made possible by really Adriana and her colleague Felipe as well, just that they have these amazing existing relationships with business owners. And so if any other municipality or location is really looking to have a kind of similar tool or similar conversations with business owners, I think it's really important that they work with somebody like Adriana who knows these folks and they, know that she really is working for their best interests.
Hi, Jessica, if you want to come off mute and ask your question.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I know a lot of the folks on the line here, but not everybody. My name's Jessica Eshlman, and I have the honor of leading Union Square Main Streets. And I had been part of some of this process, so my question surprises me because I feel like I should know the answer, but I'm just going to admit that I either don't or I can't remember it, but I still want to ask, which is, were we able to engage any landlords in this process, whether small property or larger developer? And if so, were there any learnings from that perspective of the conversation? I know in our organization, we're trying to position ourselves as a bridge. We want to serve all the best interests of the stakeholders in our program area. And of course, landlords are a stakeholder. So can you talk a little bit about that and what you might have learned?
Yeah, so I can start that, actually through this process, we did not end up speaking with property owners. Unfortunately, I don't know if Kelly you want or Ted you want to comment more on that. For this one, we were really focused on the business owner experience. I will say though that I mentioned the Lawyers for Civil Rights new model lease, the sample lease, and they did work with a number of property owners on that and even have suggestions for different kinds of property owners about how you can, set up a lease with a small business. So I'm just going to put that in the chat, but if Kelly or Ted has other comments on the question.
Yeah, so we were able to speak with brokers that work really closely with landlords. So that was where we got a lot of that perspective. I think we were approached a sense with caution in the sense that we weren't trying to like put it in violation, right? So if I were like, hi, I would like to reach out to this landlord regarding your leases, we were worried about the sort of maybe negative feedback we might have gotten there. So we deferred to brokers that have worked really closely with landlords and been in that kind of middle negotiating step, as well as lawyers and getting the legal expertise in that.
Thanks, understood. And I understand the caution, but it would be really great if we could find a way in our collective efforts to do this, to be repositioning the conversation of mutual benefit. Not continuing to build up this creation of one side versus the other, but a good lease is a good lease, and a good lease serves both people, and that's something we're really trying to do with, I think, varying degrees of success for sure. And part of that is because just like no one business and one business leader has the same experience, no one landlord and leasing group has the same experience. So it's a tough endeavor to try to create something that serves all masters, so to speak. I don't really love that phrase, but beneficiaries, I'll say. But it's something that I think about a lot, and that I hope we can continue collectively to think about and, change the narrative a little bit about this.
Definitely, Jessica. I think that is a fantastic point. I think that's something that we need to continue to work towards for the kind of whole collaboration. There's a lot of pieces to this story, a lot of pieces to the puzzle. So that is a great and fantastic point. Thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah, and I just want to say, I'm hoping that this work is just the start of what we do, and maybe somewhere down the road we can do further research or further projects that help increase the knowledge of landlords and help build that understanding between all sides of the commercial property market. That working together and win-wins are best for everybody, and reducing the adversarial relationship. That would be great. That would.
Are there any other questions?
Hi, this is one second. Let me put the camera on if I can. Sorry, just trying to figure this out. So I'm from the phone, so it's a bit harder than it seems. Hello, yeah, my name is Gustavo Sanchez. I think Kelly knows me well. I'm well in the process of trying to start a small business, and yeah, I feel represented by many of the comments that have been being raised today, and many of the points that have been, things that I'm dealing with right now. I'm surprised not to hear, when talking about leases, on the LOI, a letter of intent, or some sort of, let's say, head of terms. I don't know if the handbook makes any reference to that. I haven't had a chance to read through it yet. I will do, but I think an LOI is a very important step to set what is important from, let's say, the tenant side and the landlord side, and you don't need to have a lawyer involved. You don't need to, it's non-binding. It's just saying, hey, how are we going to discuss the lease? What are the important things? What do we want to bring to the table to start discussing? I'm surprised that has not been even mentioned. I don't know if it's in the handbook, but I just wanted to raise that. I think that's a point, that there's no money that you need to put to start discussing that. You just need to have, let's say, a good faith from both sides, and make sure that you're able to put that in written and have that discussion. So that's as a side comment. Then more as a thought. Obviously, it depends on the scale of, let's say, business that you are. But if you're, let's say, an independent person that is trying to open a small business, I think the negotiation power that you have on a lease is none, basically. You're under a lot of pressure because you will never find your perfect unit. There will never be, so you just have to make things work. And landlords know that. If you want to have that honest discussion, you have to be honest about what type of business owner you are, or what type of person you are behind that business. And it's really hard. Unfortunately, in Somerville, I don't think there's many units that suit many of the uses of businesses that people are trying to open. And then you're just trying to make whatever units you find work. And that comes at a, let's say, sacrifice on your end when negotiating the lease, when, because you don't have really options out there. I think Darryl was mentioning the other alternative. There's no other alternatives. Another alternative brings you to 3-4 months back in your process. So it just builds up and builds up. It took me 3 or 4 units to find really an honest landlord and a person that I could work with. And now we are dealing with a mess of permits and stuff. So I'm not even sure if that unit will end up working on the permit side. And I've put the effort and I'm still working on that, but it goes very slow. So you only build that pressure, and then you have no power to make things work, no negotiation power at all. So it's just that thought, because I think I'm right now in the middle. I'm going to be one of the users of this guide, but I don't know if it's really going to make a difference. I'm not dismissing the work. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of useful information for me there, but the situation is what it is. So that's just, let's say, my case. Just wanted to share it with you. I don't know if there's any advice or any guidance, further, or specific points in the handbook that you think are particularly helpful for my situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Gustavo, for coming off mute and talking about that. I think a letter of intent is a good point to speak about. I think that kind of does roll into what Darryl had mentioned about keeping a written record, having that written out of a letter of intent to use, and so that you don't necessarily have to go to that next step and you can start going through the permitting process. So thank you for mentioning that piece of it. The second piece of it is just what I'm hearing is like the frustration of what the commercial leasing process is like, right? And I do think that, there is a wide variety of people that this handbook could target, right? There might be folks who are a little bit more experienced, have a little bit more of an understanding. And then there's a lot of people who really have never been through a commercial leasing process. And I think the leasing handbook, kind of what Ted said, is a great starting off point. By no means is it going to be able to solve every single question, every single issue that is just the reality of being a commercial tenant. So again, it is a lot of, I'm going to defer to having to find a lawyer that you trust and respect and that is able to represent your ideas well. And then I kind of think you also said, you said you went through a couple of properties before you found the right landlord, that you felt like it was someone you can work with. And I commend you for doing that, because I think that is a tough conversation to have, where you might find a space that might not necessarily feel right. And so don't get yourself into a situation where it might not feel like the right situation to put yourself into. But I hear your frustrations, Gustavo. I understand. It does feel like there are very, very few there's very little power you have in the negotiation for a commercial lease, and we totally recognize that. And I will say a big part of what the anti-displacement task force is, and the small business anti-displacement task force, and just I know what economic development is trying to do, is to continue to advocate at a state level to see what sort of policies, such as potentially a commercial tenant bill of rights, what other options that there can be to solidify it and make this power balance feel a lot more even. And that is what the purpose of this handbook is to try to get someone who may have no experience at all get up to a better level where they're able to just feel a little bit more comfortable. That being said, again, our highest recommendation would be to have a lawyer to represent you and help you with all the projects. But Gustavo, I hear you, and thank you for speaking. It's important to hear these stories and important to know what the situation is for someone who is trying to open up a business in Somerville.
Can I add a thought I had when I heard that question? And good luck, Gustavo. It's exciting to hear you have an enterprise up and coming in our city. It reflects sort of the question that I had asked earlier. I hear a parallel there. And I would love to get us out of that. And I'm going to use a personal situation. I can remember early in my career where I felt like, oh, I really want this job, but if I negotiate for a higher salary, am I going to frustrate them? Are they going to pick a candidate that is going to accept a lower salary? But then I pulled back and I went, you know what? No, they're going to hire me to negotiate. They need to see me negotiating in the process. This is actually a strength. And so the parallel I'm seeing here, and again, not being a landlord, I hope it's not too far of a stretch, but landlords want successful businesses. Landlords do not want to have to find a replacement for a tenant because they folded and went out of business because they didn't ask the good questions. And so that's part of sort of changing the narrative here is helping. We want to help our small businesses feel not like they're edging a negotiation, get like 1 inch more of something, but going in, be asking very clear questions so that you know what you're signing up to and getting that landlord to understand you're a savvy business owner, and therefore a good investment on a lease. So I don't know how practical that is, Gustavo. I want to acknowledge that, but like if it's just a different way to think about it, and it could be helpful at all.
Yep. No, absolutely. I mean, I'm pleased with the landlord that we haven't signed a lease. We had those discussions, but and I do understand. Let's say I'm able to put myself on the other side and decide the concerns. But I think the cost pressure on the business owner side is always higher than on the landlord side. You're talking different scales. Unit owner probably has way more wealth and a better business case than a small business owner. I wish I was wrong, but that's my feeling. So whenever the problem comes, I think we're always under more pressure to make things work. And at the end of the day, it's money. Everybody in this call knows that that's what's gonna solve the problems. When a pipe breaks, when somebody breaks into your business, when I don't know, things that are gonna go wrong, when you're under construction and you figure out that the electrical installation is not as the drawings said, and you had something in the LOI or in the lease to cover for that, but it's a gray area. But then for business owners, that's enough to kill our business. That's enough to kill our project. For a landlord, I don't know, but I wouldn't think so. So I'm just talking that, it's an even, I think, discussion, and it could be that my business plan is not solid, and then maybe that's where I'm making the mistake. Maybe and there are a lot of financial stress, but I think I'm doing my work slowly, properly, and I still feel that pressure, and I feel that any day anything can turn down my project. That's my feeling. I don't see that feeling in the landlord's side. And it's the same with any contract. It's not only the lease, it's the architect, it's the engineering, it's the contractor. All the contracts that you sign, you're under that pressure, and that's where I think the help is needed. What can be done to really, of course, a guide on making sure that the important bits are there is necessary, but sometimes that's not enough.
Thank you again for speaking up, Gustavo, and thank you, Jessica, for your insight as well. I think it's very important to keep all of that in mind. And really what I hear here is really just compelling me to be, more forthcoming with what sort of advocacy we can do, right? How we can make it an easier process for small businesses. This is something we're thinking about constantly. Obviously, there's city processes, there's state processes. I think it's really important, again, to hear these stories, to hear what people are experiencing so that we can try to do things at a state level to ensure that there are more rights for small business owners. So I really appreciate that. I will say we have 3 more minutes, so this will be the last question. Taya, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Taya Holmes. I am the small business liaison for East Somerville Main Streets. So I work directly with a lot of business owners, and something I've noticed is that there is a really large knowledge gap when it comes to leasing. And I think that for a landlord, this is someone who makes their money through real estate and through rentals, they are going to have a lot more knowledge about this and a lot more resources and probably access to lawyers. And they are the person who is creating these rental agreements. And they're going to know more about that than, say, someone whose business is a flower shop or someone who is a hairdresser. It's just a different line of work and a different income stream. And I think that a lot of the bad feeling comes from an imbalance of power. And as we all know, knowledge is power. And I think when we create better equity with tools like this and create a more even playing field for everyone involved, that is huge. So I just want to thank you so much for creating this. I am so excited to use this as a resource for myself and also share it with the businesses I work with.
Thank you so much. We're excited for you to use it as well as we are excited for everyone on this call to use it. I did put the link initially when we first started. I'm going to go ahead and repost that. It is 5:59, so I'm going to go ahead and end the recording. Thank you all so much for joining.